Ben was standing at his father's graveside when the phone in his pocket started to ring. He almost didn't answer it. His hands were numb from the cold, his eyes swollen from 3 days of holding back tears he refused to let anyone see. But something made him look at the screen, and when he did, every hair on his arm stood up. The caller ID read, Dad. His father's number had been disconnected 2 years ago, the day the old man moved into hospice care. Ben had checked it himself. He had called it a dozen times just to hear the old voicemail greeting, just to hear that voice one more time, and every single time it had gone straight to a dead line. But right now, standing over freshly turned dirt, that same number was calling him. His thumb hovered over the screen, shaking. Slowly, he pressed answer, lifted the phone to his ear, and heard 3 words that would change absolutely everything he thought he knew about his father. Ben, it's me. What his father had hidden from him for 32 years was about to come out, and nothing in Ben's life would ever look the same again. Welcome to Digital Story Corner. Sit back, relax, and let's begin. For as long as Ben could remember, his father had been a shadow at the edge of his life. A man who left before sunrise and came home after dark. A man whose face Ben mostly knew from photographs, because in real memory, his father was almost always somewhere else. He missed Ben's 8th birthday. He missed the championship baseball game in 6th grade, the one Ben's team actually won. The one where Ben scanned the bleachers between every inning, hoping to spot that familiar gray jacket, and never did. He missed graduation, standing instead at the very back of the auditorium, so late that Ben didn't even see him until the ceremony was already over and the crowd was spilling out into the parking lot. There was one memory that stayed with Ben more than any other. He was 9 years old, and he had woken up in the middle of the night for a glass of water. Walking past his parents' room, he saw his father sitting fully dressed on the edge of the bed in the dark, lacing up his work boots at 2 a.m. Ben asked him, sleepy and confused, where he was going. His father simply said, "Just work, buddy. Go back to bed." Ben never thought to ask why anyone would go to work at 2 a.m. He simply filed it away as one more piece of evidence that his father valued something else more than him. Every single missed moment carved a little more distance between them, until by the time Ben turned 18, he genuinely believed his father simply didn't care. His mother tried to explain it sometimes, in quiet voices late at night, telling him his father worked so hard because he loved them. But to a boy who only ever felt his father's absence, those words meant nothing. Love, to Ben, was supposed to look like presence, and presence was the one thing his father never gave him. By the time Ben was in his 20s, their relationship had worn down to holiday phone calls and awkward silences. He moved across the country for work, told himself it had nothing to do with the distance he'd felt his whole life, and built a world where his father barely fit. Birthdays became a text message. Christmas became a 15-minute call, both of them running out of things to say by the second minute. And somewhere in that slow fade, Ben stopped expecting anything different. He told himself that was simply who his father was and who he would always be. Then, 3 years ago, his mother called with news that stopped him cold. His father had been diagnosed with a heart condition, the kind doctors describe in careful, gentle language because they don't want to say the real words out loud. Ben flew home more out of obligation than love, telling himself he was doing the right thing, still not quite ready to forgive a man he barely knew. That first visit to the hospital was awkward and stiff. His father looked smaller somehow, swallowed up by white sheets, the machines around him beeping in a rhythm that made Ben's chest tighten. They exchanged small talk about weather and traffic, dancing carefully around 30 years of silence neither of them knew how to break. Ben found himself staring at his father's hands, rough and calloused in a way he had never noticed before, wondering vaguely what could possibly explain hands like that. But near the end of that visit, his father did something strange. He reached into the drawer of his hospital nightstand and pulled out a small, sealed envelope, worn soft at the edges like it had been handled many times before, the paper gone thin and fragile from years of being taken out and put back. He pressed it into Ben's hand and made him promise, voice shaking with an intensity Ben had never heard from him before, that he would not open it until after he was gone. Ben took the envelope home that night and placed it in a drawer, half expecting he would forget about it entirely. But over the following months, as he made more visits, as his father's condition slowly worsened, something began to shift between them. His father started talking more, asking Ben questions about his life, actually listening to the answers, showing an interest that felt almost foreign after decades of distance. He asked about Ben's job, his relationship, his dreams for the future, lingering on every answer like he was trying to memorize it. Ben started to wonder if perhaps his father was simply trying to make up for lost time before it was too late. Some nights he left those visits almost angry, wondering why this closeness hadn't come 30 years earlier when he actually needed it. He didn't yet understand there was a much deeper reason behind those final months of quiet, careful conversation. His father passed away on a quiet Tuesday morning in early spring, surrounded by machines that had finally gone silent. Ben stood at the funeral 3 days later, feeling strangely hollow, mourning a relationship that had never quite become what he wished it could have been, grieving not just the man, but the years they never got to have. He kept waiting to feel something bigger, some wave of grief that matched what a son was supposed to feel, and instead, he mostly felt confused by his own numbness. And that was the moment his phone rang with a call from a number that no longer existed. His father's recorded voice came through the line, calm and steady, clearly prepared in advance, clearly meant for exactly this moment. He explained that he had set up a service months earlier, one that would automatically release a series of scheduled messages after his passing, timed to reach Ben at specific milestones in his life. This first one, his father said, was meant to arrive on the day of the funeral itself. His father's voice cracked slightly as he asked Ben to go home and finally open the envelope. With trembling hands, sitting alone in his childhood bedroom that night, surrounded by furniture that hadn't changed in 20 years, Ben tore open the seal. Inside was not a short goodbye note, as he expected, but pages upon pages of his father's handwriting, dated across more than 2 decades, like a journal his father had kept in secret his entire life. The first entries went back to when Ben was only 7 years old. His father described in aching detail the night their family nearly lost everything. Ben's younger sister, a baby Ben barely remembered because she had passed away in infancy from a rare illness, had required treatment their insurance refused to cover. His parents had taken out loans they could never fully explain to a young child, debts that swallowed every spare dollar for years afterward, debts that followed them like a shadow long after the hospital bills stopped arriving. His father wrote about taking a second job at a warehouse every single night after his regular shift ended, working from 6 in the evening until 4 in the morning, then sleeping only 2 or 3 hours before starting his main job again. He wrote about the 2 a.m. mornings, lacing up his boots in the dark, terrified of waking anyone, terrified most of all of Ben asking questions he wasn't ready to answer. He wrote about missing Ben's 8th birthday because he was covering an overnight shift he couldn't afford to lose, and how he had sat in the warehouse break room at midnight, eating a slice of leftover cake his wife had saved for him, alone, crying, without anyone there to see it. He wrote about standing at the back of Ben's graduation, exhausted beyond words after working a double shift the night before, terrified he would fall asleep in the audience if he sat down, choosing instead to stand in the shadows just so he wouldn't miss the moment entirely. Page after page, year after year, his father detailed a quiet, invisible sacrifice that Ben had never once suspected. He had never told Ben, or even Ben's mother, the full truth, because he was too ashamed of the debt, too proud to let his son grow up believing his family was struggling, too afraid that if Ben knew, he would carry that weight the way his father had carried it, every single night for over a decade. He chose instead to let Ben believe he simply didn't care, rather than let his son carry the truth of what he was doing every single night in the shadows. Near the final pages, his father's handwriting grew shakier, clearly written much more recently, likely during those last hospital visits. He wrote that watching Ben grow into a good man despite everything, despite years of feeling abandoned, was the proudest achievement of his entire life. He wrote that he understood if Ben could never fully forgive him for those lost years, but he needed his son to know, once and for all, that every missed birthday, every missed game, had been an act of love so heavy he could never find the words to explain it while he was alive. Ben sat on the floor of his old bedroom and wept in a way he hadn't allowed himself to in years, mourning not the distant father he thought he'd lost, but the profoundly loving one he never fully got to know. He read certain pages 3, 4 times, tracing his father's handwriting with his fingers, as though touching the words might somehow bring the man back long enough to say everything Ben suddenly needed to say. Over the following year, 3 more scheduled messages arrived, exactly as his father had planned. One arrived on Ben's birthday, his father's warm, recorded voice wishing him joy and reminding him he was loved beyond measure. A message Ben played over and over until he had memorized every pause and breath in it. Another arrived the day Ben got engaged, his father's voice full of pride, offering fatherly advice about marriage that Ben had never expected to receive, advice about patience and showing up, quietly, every single day, in the small ways that count most. The final message his father had prepared arrived nearly 2 years later, on the exact day Ben's own son was born. In that last recording, his father's voice, weaker than in the others, clearly recorded when he knew the end was close, told Ben something that settled deep into his chest and stayed there. He said that love doesn't always look like presence. Sometimes it looks like absence, chosen painfully, silently, for the sake of protecting the people you love most. He told Ben not to judge the silence of others too quickly, because sometimes the quietest people are carrying the loudest sacrifices, simply choosing never to speak of them. Ben sat in the hospital room holding his newborn son that day, tears falling freely, finally understanding his father completely, 30 years too late, and yet somehow, in that very moment, exactly on time. He looked down at his son's tiny fingers wrapped around his own and made a silent promise that his own children would never have to wait until a funeral to understand how deeply they were loved. He named his son after his father that same week. And every single year on his father's birthday now, Ben sits his own children down and plays them one of those old recorded messages, watching their faces as they hear the voice of a grandfather they never got to meet, making absolutely certain that the man who sacrificed everything in silence is never, ever forgotten. If this story moved you, subscribe to Digital Story Corner and hit the bell. A brand new story drops every single day.